ever been involved in that kind of a dance where you realize you're the only one that can actually hear the music? I was in a dance club in Austin, Texas when I was in college. And my roommate and I went in to dance with a couple of girls. And there were a couple of girls standing next to the handrail, maybe 3 or 4 of them all together. And he walked up behind one and said, "Hey, would you like to dance?" And she never turned around. She didn't move at all. And so he asked another one, and he got the same reaction. And finally, I looked at one and said, "Would you like to dance?" And she lit up, and she walked with me to the dance floor, and we started dancing. And I realized she had a really strange speech pattern. And then she explained that her and her friends were all from the Austin School for the Deaf. And I'm like, "How do you come to the club if you can't hear?" And she said, "I can feel the beat of the music in my feet." And she was actually a pretty good dancer, even though she couldn't hear the music. And I'm going to tell you, there are a whole lot of people in leadership that are tone deaf to what's going on around them, but they can still be pretty good dancers. That's what I want to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, and I can tell you there's a whole lot of people in leadership that are absolutely tone deaf. They have no idea what's going on outside of their little circle because they're driven by their ego. They're driven by their own personal success or their own personal net worth or their own self-evaluation of importance. And so their self-importance trumps everything. They get to decide based on what's important to them and how important they feel, what's right and what's wrong. And the scary thing is, if you look at politics as one example of leadership, there are a whole lot of people who are much more concerned about their political career, their impact in the world while they're alive, the amount of money that they can put in the bank, the reputation they have in front of the media, in front of the cameras, in front of the world. They're much more concerned about that than the impact that the decisions they make will have for generations to come. When I say that, I have to think of, a movie we just saw recently called Oppenheimer. And I think of all the political dancing around from the global political aspect of was he involved in communism or socialism or not, and was he involved in loving America or not. Those things are hard to discern what someone's internal intent is. The best you can do is ask yourself about the people they hang out with. That's about the best you can do, unless they're really clear on their intent. And from the conversations that were had, it's really hard to tell what the intent was. But the real challenge of the whole cycle from, say, 1900 to 1965 was the number of people who rose to prominence and political power without being elected by the people they purport to serve. A whole lot of people rose to power without being elected by the people they purport to serve. I can tell you, there's a whole lot of people in corporate America that have the same issue. They've been appointed by the board. They've been put in place by the people that matter the most, so to speak. They've been given opportunity because, they know how to manage a bottom line, and they perhaps know how to manage people, and they know how to make profit, and they know how to create new products and develop new opportunities. And generally speaking, that's why you want somebody to run your company. But if they're short-sighted and really the only thing they're concerned about is their ego, their reputation, their net worth, the chances are you're going to have a short-term values system as well. I like to think of leadership as a dance. Sometimes it's a line dance, and everybody's moving to exactly the same step in exactly the same direction, the same beat. And you know as well as I do, if you've been to a wedding or a school dance or anything of the sort, maybe on a cruise ship, that when they start the cha-cha slide, if you don't have an instructor who says, "This is how you do it," there's going to be some yahoo in the middle when everybody else is shuffling to the left that they're shuffling to the right. Same with the Cupid Shuffle, the YMCA, the Hokey Pokey. It doesn't matter. There's always somebody who seems to be listening to the beat of a different drummer. They're dancing to the cha-cha slide when everybody else is doing the Cotton Eye Joe. They are not moving in the same direction that everybody else is. They don't hear the beat, they don't know the moves, they don't know the steps, and they're not following along. It's inevitable. But there's a whole different thing when everybody is hearing the same song and they're choosing to do their own thing. That's what leadership looks like when everybody individually is driven by their own ego, their own self-importance, and their own income. They do what's right for them in the moment. They don't care if it fits the rest of the dance. They don't care what the impact is that it has on everybody else around them. So instead of two people artfully doing a tango or several people on the dance floor together dancing to a waltz or a two-step or a slow grind, you have hundreds of people doing their own thing in the same direction, all the directions at one time, and you've probably got one whirlwind tornado standing in the middle, spinning around with their arms out. Probably the most common place that you would see something like that is what we now call the silent dances. Maybe you've seen these. If not, look it up on YouTube. They actually have dances where everyone comes with headphones. And sometimes there's no music in the room at all. And everybody in the room has different music in their ears. So they're all on the dance floor, all at the same time. And nobody, odds are listening to the same song at the same time. So they're offbeat. They're clapping at a different time. They're snapping at a different time. They're jumping at a different time. They're spinning at a different time. There is no cohesion. There is no coordination. There is nothing that drives them to behave the same. Leaders who choose to listen to their own music and not listen to what's going on around them, that tone-deaf leader who has only their self-importance, their ego, and their reputation in mind, those are like people at a dance where everybody's wearing headphones and listening to a different song. And they don't care about you or your rhythm or your dance or your moves at all. Just what they hear. Now, the other thing you've got to be aware of, and this is the hard part, is that there's a really good probability that in your leadership lifetime, you're going to encounter that someone who's got their headphones on, and they probably have them on noise canceling mode, and they got the music turned up really loud. They're not just tone deaf to what's going on around them. They're intentionally drowning it all out because they have their own agenda. They have their own short-term goals, and maybe they have long-term goals, but truth is they're probably just focused on the short term. How do I get the next job, the next promotion, the next raise? How do I get ahead for me? And they're not concerned with who they have to step on or what they miss hearing along the way. Now, as a leader, you're going to have to be aware that this is just a fact of leadership. It's a fact of life. There will always be people who don't care about you or anybody around you. They don't care about your long-term goals. They don't care about the rest of society. Their civility went out the window a long time ago. All that's left for them is this understanding of power. And they will move people around, players on the chessboard, like a thumb puzzle, rearranging every 2 or 3 seconds, moving one person into position and another person out of position, not because it's good for the team, not because it's good for the long run, not because it's good for anything other than the song that's playing in their ear, what they're hearing, all on their own. That's why they do what they do. They're not motivated by you. They're not motivated by what's best for anybody except themselves. The one song playing in their ear over the noise cancellation of everything else around them, that's what they're dancing to. They say it takes 2 to tango. Generally speaking, it takes 2 to waltz. Any group of people of an odd number even can line dance. But in a mosh pit, that's just a bunch of people trying to get their own way, dancing to their own song, not caring at all about others. Now, there are times that there's a mosh pit where everybody's hopping at the same time. You ever listen to the song All the Small Things? Every time I've ever played that song in a crowd, the whole world turns into popcorn. They jump up and down at the same time, sometimes pumping their fist in the air, and they're all moving to the same beat. Recklessly, crazy, in my opinion, but all to the same beat. It's a little bit different. But sometimes that mosh pit starts to push each other around, shove each other from one side to the other. Maybe they'll get a crowd surfer who'll jump up on top, and people will move them from one side to the other unless they don't like them, and then they just drop them. And yes, that's a lot like leadership. seems like for a while they're all dancing around to the same thing. They're all moving to the same beat. They're all reacting to the same thing at once. And then suddenly they all step aside just to watch one person fail. Pretty common in leadership, to be honest with you. Sad, scary. But here's the harder part. The person that they're all about to let down usually isn't aware enough. If you want to test that theory out, go to YouTube, type in mosh pit fails or crowd surf fails or crowd dive fails, and you're going to see even musical artists who from their own stage think, this crowd loves me so much, I'm going to dive into the crowd and they're going to let me crowd surf across the top and they're going to move me from one side to the other while I sing, and it's going to be really, really cool. And they dive and the crowd steps aside and watches them hit the ground. There's a lot of that in leadership. There are a lot of people who are self-aggrandizing, who've put themselves at the top, and they believe that the world absolutely adores them. They believe that everyone supports their ideology. Why? Well, because, for lack of a better term, they began to believe their own press. They've told everybody how awesome they are, how wonderful they are, how incredible their ideas are, how amazing the world will be when it's all following the music they're singing. And yet, they're the only ones that believe that press. They're the only ones that have read the press release. They're the only ones who have listened to the consultants. It was pretty ironic, to be honest with you, watching the movie and hearing that interchange between the would-be villain near the end and his own team, who had been advising him all along on how he was going to strategize, because they just then realized he's about to crowd surf, and he's expecting us to support him. That was a whole different ball game. And it's going to happen to you if you're not aware. If you find yourself all wrapped up in your own self-importance, wrapped up in your own self-aggrandizing, you've been padding your own pocket, you've been lining your own nest, so to speak, there's going to be a day that you're going to jump into the crowd believing that everybody supports you. And the truth of the matter is, the only ones that are even close to supporting you are the ones that are kind of catching the leftovers of your manipulations. Yeah, they're learning along the way, or they're benefiting as well. They're profiteering off of your profiteering. And so they will stay in support until the profiteering stops, until you dive into the crowd and they realize two of us can't hold you up. So we're moving to our own safety. And at that moment, you're going to crash. It's just the way it works. If you want to see the tango or the waltz in the life of your leadership, where at least as pairs you have some unison, some working together, your only option is to change the sheet music. Take off your headphones and listen to what everybody else is singing and saying. Listen to the beat that's going on around you. You've got to raise your level of awareness. And if you don't do that, you're going to find yourself surfing on a crowd that doesn't support you. And that's really not surfing. That's not even falling with style. It's just falling. As a leader, awareness is absolutely key. Self-awareness. Are you aware of your own belief systems, your own core values? Do you know what it is that you expect the world to say about you 50 years from now? 50 years after you're dead? Will your contribution to the life on this earth be a good thing or unknown? Will you ever have an impact that is memorable? If the answer to those questions are, I don't know, then you haven't planned it very well. You haven't been very intentional about it. If the footprint that you're going to leave on this earth will be cast in stone, if the handprints that you'll leave behind will one day be found on Hollywood Boulevard, but that's it, then the impact that you're leaving is way too small because it's just based on your ego. Those are plans that you have to make. And if you're not aware that you're not intentional about the plans that you have made for the long term, then you're going to live according to the plans of the short term. And you're going to find that your life cycle as a leader is much more like a silent dance, where everybody has their headphones in, nobody's listening to you, nobody's paying attention to you. And another interesting facet about that is most people at those silent dances have their eyes closed. They're not just not listening to you, they're not watching either. They couldn't care less what you're up to. You haven't impressed them. You haven't gotten their attention, unless you're a beautiful body and they may be watching you because you have a beautiful body. Other than that, you're not even on the radar. That's the life of the unaware leader. That's the life of the leader who says, I don't really have to pay attention to anybody else. I'm not listening to the mores. I'm not listening to the changing of policies, the changing of the guard, so to speak. I'm not paying any attention to the fact that the people who were in charge 3 years ago have vanished from the scene. The ones in charge now have a completely different agenda. I'm not paying attention to that. I just want to see my paycheck go up. I just want to see my level of influence go up. I just want to have more power. Thumb puzzles. Chances are you're being moved around in that thumb puzzle too. Someone else is repositioning you for their own benefit, short-term goals. And your life of leadership is going to be short-lived. And when the song is over in your head and you open your eyes and you look around and realize, I'm the only one dancing. At that point, you're going to wish that you had spent a little more time paying attention to what's going on around you, watching the other people as they move. Heaven forbid there be a fire or a disaster in a place where everyone is silent dancing with their headphones on and their eyes closed, because that could be a mess. But that's a lot of people in leadership. They're in the crowd. They're moving with the stream. They're going where the energy goes. They're doing what they believe is going to be the best thing for their career. But they're unaware of everything going on around them. They're partying while the world burns in some cases. When I say lead the narrative, what I'm really talking about is kind of changing the sheet music. It's finding a new way to hear. It's changing the pace, changing the rhythm, being in control of what that is. If you don't like the way everybody else is dancing, well, don't dance with them, but encourage them to dance with you. If you don't like the mosh pit style and you're not up for a tango or a waltz or a two-step, then create your own line dance. Get people to move in the rhythm with you. Get people to move in that direction that's going to be a long-term impact for good on them, on you, on society. That's going to impact your legacy for the positive. Not because your legacy is important, but because we'll look back 100 years from now and go, they made a contribution to the world. The world is a better place because they were here. Sometimes we think that's reserved for presidents and doctors. And maybe if you were to just go read the list of Nobel Prize winners and figure out what they've won the Nobel Prize for, you'd be astonished. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Nobel was a dynamite maker. Yeah, the first prize went to someone who blew stuff up. But also helped in mining of precious metals and coal and other things that were necessary for survival at the time. Maybe your contribution will be unrecognized in the moment, maybe even unrecognizable now. That's okay. 100 years from now, the world will be a better place because you were here, because you were aware, because you changed the sheet music, because you didn't get involved in the mosh pit, fighting for position just to be important for the moment. You stepped back and you became more aware, and you looked at the long-term impact of your core values, the decisions that you made, where you invested yourself, your time, talent, treasure, and attention. If you want to be a great leader who has a great legacy, get out of the mosh pit. Get out of the silent dance. Pay attention to what's going on in the world around you. You'll have a greater opportunity to leave a greater legacy and have a greater impact. You've got to become aware and intentional to do that. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, or Tell Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. And so I joined Toastmasters. And I went from Toastmasters as a newbie. In fact, Jim and I joined at the same time, if I remember right. By the way, Jim Gardner is one of my mentors.
You were ahead of me. You had already gone to national.
Okay. So when I joined Toastmasters in the local club, one of the challenges that I ran into was even the people who were what they would call a distinguished Toastmaster still had some communication skills that I'm like, I thought you would have worked those out by now. And then within the first 10 weeks that I was there, I finished the first 10 level of speeches, which most people took like a year to do. And then I was invited to compete. And so within the first year of being a Toastmaster, I competed in the international speech competition against 35,000 other people, and I made it to the semifinals. That was about the same time that I joined the John Maxwell team. I had already been coaching with the Dale Carnegie program for almost 5 years at that point. And I realized there were still a whole lot of people who loved communicating,
But really they were more along the lines of, I keep talking and nobody's listening, or I keep talking and nobody's paying any attention. And part of the challenge that we run into as communicators is we have to be willing to admit, if nobody's listening, maybe it's not their hearing problem, but your talking problem. It's not what they heard, but what you said. And so we've got to be able to take responsibility on both sides of that. But as I began to work with a lot of people, they would say to me, I want you to help me write the speech that sells. And I was like, I don't do that. Why? Anybody ever heard Les Brown?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you've ever heard Les Brown, what's the name of his speech?
Can't remember.
You got to be hungry. But if you've ever heard you got to be hungry, you've already heard you got to be hungry. And so a lot of people look at somebody like a Les Brown and they say, well, he makes 50 grand every time he steps on stage. I want to make 50 grand when I step on stage. Teach me how to write, you got to be hungry. I'm like, well, you can't have you got to be hungry. It's already written. It's already been delivered a billion times. And it's powerful, and it's thought-provoking, and it's life-transforming, but it's his speech. How many of you have heard somebody deliver a speech or a story or a portion of a speech and realize, I've heard that before, right? And so the challenge that we run into on both sides of that is, it's already been said before, and now you have a credibility problem. The other thing that I realized was that people had fascinating stories, but no point. How many of you have heard somebody say, I'm going to tell you a story. It really doesn't have anything to do with what I'm going to talk about today, but I think it's a great story. And they tell you the story, and when they're done, they're like, I'm not sure why I told you that story, but I thought it was entertaining. And you're like, no, it was a waste of my time. Raise your hand if you know that's true, right?
Yeah.
And so you've heard that, and you're like, why do people do that? And so that juxtaposition of frustration, I'm thinking on one side, there are all these people who have been trained to be communicators, and they still fail at communication. And then there are these people who are great orators, but they don't have anything to say. So where's the balance? How do you strike that balance? What do you do? And so I was in front of a group that Jim and I used to belong to, and somebody told their story, and I said, why don't you try it like this? And so I told it like that. And they went, how did you do that? Anybody ever heard of Dr. Caroline Leaf, neuroscientist? She says, if you do something and people go, how did you do that? And you think to yourself, I thought everybody could do that. That's your gift. I went, oh, interesting. And so I started doing it on a regular basis. I'd hear somebody tell their story, and I would tell them back. And I had a guy, I still have the business cards in my pocket, because I had a guy show up at one of my events, sat through the whole thing. At the end of the day, he said, when I came here, I came because my friend drugged me. I don't go to seminars like this. I've been to way too many of them, and I hate them. I'm like, well, I'm glad you stayed all day. He said, the first hour, I was ready to walk out. And then you told my story. And I realized this guy knows something I don't know. He said, but I think you've got the wrong name for your class. At the time, it was called Transforming Stories, Transforming Lives. I said, okay, what should it be? He said, I think you should call it, I can tell your story better than you can, and I can prove it. And I had a pastor tell me that's the most arrogant thing I've ever heard anybody say. And I said, well, if you play golf with Tiger Woods and he says, I'm going to beat you by 10 strokes, do you argue with him? If you're playing basketball with Michael Jordan and he says, I'm going to dunk this ball, do you go, yeah, right? No. If Shaq says, I will keep you out of the key, do you say, yeah, not today? No. Because you realize they're the best at what they do. So in honest humility, we're about to test that theory, and we'll see if I'm right, if the gift holds its weight. And we're going to do that by inviting all of you to come up here one at a time. But here's...
Loren is a master teacher on storytelling, and I learned so much. I'm really going to have to sit down and go back through everything, and I think I might have to have some more coffees with Loren, but it was totally worth my time, and I really highly recommend it if you're looking to grow your ministry, grow your business, grow your career. Loren will serve you well.